Hello, I hope you all could see and hear us. This is the new program. I'm Dmitry Sitkovetsky. This is the new program called Transformation, Art of Reinvention in the Times of the Pandemic, Q&A with Dima and friends. And I do have a very, very special friend this afternoon. It's Sir Antonio Pappano. For me, Tony, of course. I'll be calling him, but don't get too familiar too soon. Now, Antonio Pappano, of course, is for many years, almost 2 decades, is artistic director, the music director of the Royal Opera House here in Covent Garden in London, as well as almost as many years, the music director of the Accademia di Santa Cecilia Orchestra in Rome. And he's been going from one success to the next, and I've been to many of his performances, and he's done extraordinary things with both organizations. Now, Tony, we are here mostly not to talk about your successes, but what have you been doing in the last 9 months? Tell me.
I mean, my failures.
No, those everybody's failures. I mean, the whole stop of the world. You know how the pandemic, what you learned, what you lost is obvious. A lot of performances, but also maybe there is something positive that's happened in this time.
Well, it's been an extraordinary time. I think perhaps for me, the idea of stopping, of physically putting the brakes on, has had an enormous effect on me, to the point where at first I didn't recognize myself. I'm sort of an energy bundle, and I thrive on continuous movement and travel and working with many different groups of people, many different kinds of combinations of collaborations, if you like. And I've been living like that for a very, very long time. It's how I've set up my life. But, you know, I'm 60 years old now, and I have been starting to think, wait a minute, what am I doing here? And this enforced stop has made me see how life, at least for me, could be different. Now, look, I'm a music director, as you said, of 2 institutions. So it's been a very, very anxious time because the financial ramifications of this pandemic on arts institutions has been enormous. We can't underestimate how much damage has been done. And so the survival of my 2 institutions has been at the forefront of my thinking. So I haven't been, you know, relaxed at home reading and, you know, and gaining my, you know, sort of storing up energy for what's coming. It's been often a very, very fraught experience of how we can move one step closer to some kind of normalization. And of course, each time we get somewhere, we're pushed back. And especially in our sector, this has been a very, very difficult problem. But there have been some positives. There have been the fact that I can think about what I'm doing, what I've done, what I'm going to do, to a degree that has sort of what I would call meaningful depth, which I don't often get the luxury of having. And my body is, I think, certainly my body is the better for it. My head, I don't know about you, Dima, but sometimes that's very, very difficult, because between the anxiety for the institutions, between not knowing what obstacle is coming next, and what the plight of our musicians, the people we work with, what is going to happen to them? You know, if if resources run out, if this is so. It's a combination of many different things, but contemplation is an exercise that I think a lot of human beings underestimate, and certainly I have and have not put it at the forefront of my life, and I've now had to, and I think that has been a very good thing. Sorry, that's a long answer to
No, but it's a very important answer, because this is not something that, I mean, 9 months of anybody's life, which is so dramatically different than your maybe if not 40, 35 years of continuously being on the go and everything. It requires complete restructuring, reinventing yourself. And I know you've been playing a lot more, of course, than you have been.
I've been playing the piano quite a bit more. Yes, it's true. And which is, look, when you grow up playing the instrument, that somehow is the original part of you. I mean, we can conduct, you and I, all we want, but you're a violinist and I'm a pianist. And, at the end of the day, look, I've been very fortunate because I've had this Italian outlet to be able, I've done 11, 12, 13 maybe programs since July, I think, just in Italy alone. Beethoven cycle of all the symphonies, plus various other programs, and it's been, and I've tried to reinvent myself on the web for the Royal Opera House. I've done so many things. I continue to do, scene analysis of operas, and just to also to give something back, to keep contact with the audience, to create an educational stopover for people who want to continue their learning experience of opera and how it works. But I want to conduct. I want to, like you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, when I finally stepped on the stage, I haven't been as lucky as you, because everything's just been totally pushed away and canceled. And, my orchestra in America, we've been waiting for that hall, which was supposed to open at the end of March. And of course, it's still standing there in all its beauty and glory, and it hasn't been opened. So everything's been pushed back. My Japanese tour, everything went, whatever. This is the story for everybody. But you need to, as you said, me too. I'm a very active person, so I had to find, fortunately, some activities already been in place, like doing transcriptions. I've been doing transcriptions like a man possessed every morning. This morning I already did another movement.
But you're a master at this. You're a master.
Well, I love that. I love that. It's just something that gives me tremendous satisfaction, because unlike our performing profession, it has the beginning, middle, and the end. And once you've finished, it has a life of its own. It's played by other people. It's there. But our profession doesn't quite have that. As I once said, and got in trouble because somebody overheard me saying it. I said, why are you so upset about this performance? Every concert is a dress rehearsal for the next one, which in many ways, we learn something, and then next time we might not do the same mistakes, or we'll do new ones. At least it's a process. Yeah. So, but for the first time, when I finally stepped on stage with my violin, and I also did some conducting and everything, my goodness, that was a moment of total ecstasy. Sort of, in a way, I remember how you and I first sat down and played after 2 months not having any direct contact. And we sat down, and I stood up, you sat down, and we played all 3 Brahms sonatas in a row. It's just, the hair was up. Like it was an incredible moment of ecstasy, because this is what we need. We need to communicate. And I think what you've been doing, because you're incredibly communicative person, and as a musician, I think it's one of your strongest qualities. You just need to find whatever there is possible if it's the web, so internet, this and that, not only silly things that we sent to each other, which was at the beginning very prominent. We all thought it was ha ha ha. Then it got to be a lot more serious, I think. Anyway, let me go to there's a number of questions people sent ahead of time, so I don't want to take too much time. Just we can go on and chat indefinitely, but there's some interesting and serious issues from our colleagues. I will not name who they come from, but I have them all written. So one, earlier crisis where so-called classical music has been a big unifying and comforting factor, have brought a lot of new composers with new music that have become since iconic. Beethoven, Shostakovich, Sibelius, Pärt, and so forth. Could this happen now? Or is this a push back to the safety of old and well-known? Will there be any means to take risks and give the audiences something they're not aware of they need?
That's a difficult question to answer, but the hope is that in a year's time, that there'll be a treasure trove of new music with composers. Well, I don't know that this period is really any different for composers who usually live a very, very solitary existence in their rooms writing. But the inspiration of this difficult and challenging time hopefully has been in some ways an inspiration, or at least an encouragement to try to express the emotions around what we're experiencing. I don't know that that will be true. That is my hope. The reason I say that is because I remember early on in this pandemic time doing a forum somewhat like this with Alan Gilbert and Marin Alsop and Esa-Pekka Salonen, who was in his home and was expecting to have, with all this time, was expecting to write and to compose. And although my hope is that he's gotten over it, but at the beginning he was totally blocked. He just, even though he had all this time, he did not feel the inspiration, did not feel like he had anything to say at the moment. He just felt somehow empty. And this is tragic, but I bet you it's probably true for many, many composers out there. But we never know. And the hope is that there has been something. Now, what is the expectation? Is the expectation for music that is joyous, music that has ebullience, energy, encouragement, something to stir us out of the gloom of this period. I think a lot of contemporary music has a great deal of trouble trying to express anything that's joyous or positive, or because there seems to be this necessity to probe the darker corners of the human psychology, which has become the story of contemporary music for a very, very long time, and renders it sometimes predictable and therefore at the end dull to the greater audience, unfortunately. Therefore, people are wanting to go back to the comfort food, the music that is comfort food to them. The Beethoven, the Brahms, the etc., the Mozart, that which they know and love. I think all of it has its place. I think it's up to the listener to not give up his sense of adventure. I think this is very, very important. It's not just now and the past, there is a future. And think ahead, come on, what's out there? do I like it? No. Do I like this? Yes, I like, okay, try it all. Be omnivorous in your tastes. I think society gets scared.
Yeah.
And they lose their nerve, and so they need the comfort of which is sure.
Yeah, and if you look at the history of especially 20th century, where unfortunately after the importance of Schoenberg and Stravinsky, who probably were the most influential composers in so-called classical music, they sort of, especially Schoenberg, sort of moved this serious music off the main road. And of course, immediately, the so-called the lighter music, first operetta, and then in this country was Gilbert and Sullivan, the music hall, and eventually it came to Broadway, musical, which is a fantastic form, which we both know and love. And there's geniuses working in there, and there's masterpieces written. But then there came, of course, the film music, and then pop music, and rock, and so forth. And they took the main focus, and of course the number of people that follow. So we sort of been delegated to the peripheral in terms of numbers. Now that didn't quite happen. What I saw still in the so-called the Soviet bloc, where the new Viennese school was simply not allowed. So that wall, for once, served somewhat a good purpose, because composers like Prokofiev, like Shostakovich, like Khachaturian wrote in all different genres, including film music, including songs. And they were, if you stopped someone on the street at that time and asked do they know who Shostakovich, they knew right away. They even knew his songs. My dear friend Rodion Shedrin, who just turned 88, he wrote an incredibly popular song to one of the films, and it was very, very, everybody knew that song. So it wasn't such separation of genres. They were allowed and they were encouraged because of this, the socialist way of life. It's democratic, and this, everybody's for all the people. It was not all wrong, and it was not all bad. Where in the West, it really separated, and only Bernstein sort of combined different genres successfully. So I think, hopefully, in the future, it will not be such separate species, because if we go back, 150 years ago, when Brahms and Johann Strauss lived in Vienna, they had mutual admiration for each other. And remember Brahms, that episode when he looked at the score of the Blue Danube, where it says by Johann Strauss, and unfortunately not by Johannes Brahms. So expressing a lovely, friendly envy that he wished he read. We know how he was crazy about writing valse. In every piece of music, there's a valse of Brahms. So, in that time, they coexisted quite amicably. So that's changed. Now, let me ask you something else from here. Something maybe, this is an interesting one. The role of the conductor seems to have changed over the years from dictator to collaborator. Do you agree? And what are the most important qualities of a successful conductor in 2020?
Well, I think that we mustn't forget that somebody has to decide. You can't have collaboration from A to Z when you've got a certain amount of time to put together a piece. You'll never get it together. There'll be too many
various opinions. Yeah.
It's impossible to imagine. I think everything has to do with the manner of the conductor. And today, there's less patience, and even by law, there are powers that the conductor does not have that he used to have. In the past, Toscanini could fire a musician on the spot. That just is impossible today, and doesn't happen. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
But the force of the personality and the conviction of the conductor and the preparation of the conductor to guide the orchestra through with a manner that respects their abilities, I think is important. But there are certain pieces that lend themselves to a certain collaboration. If I'm a piano player, if I'm doing a Mozart symphony with a very, very small, or a Haydn symphony, with a very small ensemble, and the concertmaster says something about the bowing that, could really a given passage and would render it either more alive, more articulate, or more smooth, depending on the case, then I'd be stupid to not want to have his input. That kind of collaboration is hugely important. If I hear a wind soloist play something absolutely stunningly, that maybe by giving him just that little bit of time to make the curve in a phrase will bring the best out of him, I'd be stupid not to, So I think the conductor must not be dogmatic, but the musicians must also render themselves really mentally and musically as part of a team that needs a trainer, needs a musical force that guides them through the journey that is music. And respect and honesty and preparation is everything. Look, does a conductor get impatient? Can you have a bad day? Can your personality anyway be cantankerous and not so sweet as somebody else's personality? Yes. But unless there's actual abuse of any kind, verbal and God forbid physical, I think you have to go. If the guy is prepared or if the gal is prepared musically, you have to go with it. The musician has to go with the conductor.
Yes, because unlike, and this is what probably will lead us to the next question, kind of related to it, but what very often seeing just your part in the orchestral, a body in the orchestral, in the score, is only a partial view. Even the solo part, of a concerto, how often, now I've been teaching a lot more than I ever have before, online mostly, of course, but still, how often I said, do you know what's going on in the orchestra? This is a dialogue. No, a lot of soloists don't really know. They kind of have a vague idea. What they also don't know very often, how the preparation. I often like to meet before the first rehearsal, to meet with the concertmaster, to make sure that he's on the same wavelength with me, as far as bowings, as far as character of the strokes and this. If it's a Baroque piece, I usually would have a special session with the principal cellist, especially something like the Seasons. I have a special part for the cembalo player. I will also spend some time. So there's a lot of preparation, not necessarily on mine, but what it does, it makes us already participants of the same idea. We are on the same team, and the sooner you get it, of course, the old style where they hardly made any contact, I think that's pretty much. But as much as we would like, especially given the time constraints, we know that one person, with very rare exceptions, writes it, and one person is given the right to interpret it at the end of the day, especially when you have an army of participants, you know. And that leads me to an interesting question, which kind of related to it. It's been submitted. What's your opinion about the orchestral musicians who begin to conduct, and why, in spite of their thorough knowledge of the orchestral repertoire and the way things work, very few of them become real conductors? It's a loaded question, isn't it?
Look, what is conducting? You have to.
Well, that's
that question.
Yeah.
And who is the conductor? Who, that figure, that personality, that is a conductor who is able to draw the best out of musicians?
Yeah.
Well, look, I come from the traditional line. I grew up in an opera house. I played the piano for rehearsals. My father was a voice teacher. I've been around singers all my life. I came up through the opera house, and that was the tradition for many of the great conductors of the past, had that kind of upbringing, musically speaking.
Yeah.
Being a pianist, of course, you know, I have many more voices under my fingers. I have the totality usually under my fingers. So that already gives an advantage for eventually for score reading and things like this.
Absolutely.
For seeing the bigger manuscript, the many lines that make up an orchestral score. The ability to know what to let happen and what to make or to coax, that takes years.
Absolutely.
I think, you know, you just because you are a great musician, and that has to be the prerequisite. You have to be a great musician. You have to know how music works. You have to have a level of preparation. You have to have a feeling for the journey of harmony. You have to have a melodic gift. You have to be able to shape, and you have to be a great storyteller. You just have to be influenced by music, and it has to be able to go through you, and you have to be able to then regurgitate it in a manner that has coherence, naturalness, and of tempo and of dramaturgy.
Yeah.
I don't think that everybody has that gift, frankly, and that too many people start wanting to conduct without the basics, or the time necessary to hone those basics. I mean, one thing is your arm, and everybody has a different style of beating. There are patterns. There are the patterns that we know: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 5, all that stuff. But then how that affects sound, how your arm creates different sounds, how you embrace the orchestra, how you stay out of their way, how you impose rhythmic precision. And it's not only by being, you know, precise. Sometimes it's just letting them do it, you know, and that creates the greatest amount of relaxation from which convincing rhythm can come.
Yeah.
You know, it's a weird thing. You'd think that, you know, tightness and this kind of body language
is everything. Not at all. You have to.
Yeah, I'm still learning, you know, about that.
I think we all we all learned that it's a process. One is never really figured out, because you can study score for hours and hours in familiar score, and you see things and you want to do 100 things with this and with every detail, and then you come into the rehearsal and your plan A just went down the toilet because of this and that. The other thing, it does not work the way you want. You wanted to do it in 4, it doesn't work. You have to do it in 2, and so forth. So when you hear the orchestra, just to give a sort of even number, let's say you hear 10 things that you would like to improve. And that's where the real experience and the real conductor knows that 2 or 3 will be better next time we play. Don't touch them. They will sort out by themselves. 2 or 3, depending on the level, don't go there, because you lose your time and you probably won't accomplish much. Then there is a remaining 2 or 3, better 2, that you actually have to talk about when you stop. Because if you talk about more than 2 or 3, you lost them. You lost the concentration. It's already you're talking too much and so forth. And that calculation has to be at the speed of lightning while you're conducting and while you're sort of probing what is that group of people. Even they might be your orchestra, but you haven't seen them, or they might be in a strange mood and something in the air. So it's a very preparation is extremely important, but then the reaction, I think, is what really makes the difference. And for this, you need to be wired in a particular way. And for me also, was always been a great mystery and great attraction. Why every orchestra Sitkovetsky conducted sounded like Philadelphia. So he brought his own sound. The truly great conductors, they bring their sound without even doing anything, just by being there, because all that sound that comes immediately becomes, and there are some conductors with their own sound. That's for me the equivalent, because my idea was always, if I can make any violin, even poor violin, sound like to have my sound, why can't I do it on the body of the orchestra? So for me, that was sort of idea fix, sort of uber idea how to make the orchestra. And I was able to do it early on just because I formed a very elite, very special orchestra, which is NAS. That's a hand-picked orchestra, and that, of course, they were my friends, and they're still very much involved with me. It's much easier to do with them, but the trick is to do it with the orchestra you never conducted. If after a day or 2 or 3 at the most, if you have those, all of a sudden you have your own sound. That's also, but how to explain it? Yeah, that's an interesting, which is not to say that no conductors ever came from the orchestra. Of course, starting with Toscanini, there in the past there were quite a few.
It's a cellist.
As a cellist, exactly, and there were, Colin Davis was a clarinet player. We can go back.
Percussionist, yes.
Exactly, and so forth. I mean, there were exceptions, but it's very true what you was saying before, and this is what I often come across with soloists just as well, that especially higher strings, they think horizontally. They don't hear the vertical, which pianists or people who, hear
the harmony,
the harmony, which really determines the way the melody should be. Because there's the soloists, the upper strings, they think that we are the most important, that there's nothing more important than the melody, the rest is an accompaniment. How wrong they are. Even the singers should know, they think we all in the service of singers, and I'm in the singers' house, as you know, half of my house is opera singing, but they should respond to every harmony change, to the connection between the words and the sound. And I think that's the most interesting thing. And I think that probably is a built-in, a bit of a problem, that they think horizontally while the totality of it. That's why I always suggest, I'm not a good pianist and I cannot play or read, fluently, but I always go back to the piano and I play the chords. I feel it's important for me. Very often I now obtain a piano reduction of even familiar score, just to remind myself, sort of to get into your system, how the chords. Yeah, I would recommend that. And still, it's a process. So let's go now into something lighter than the well, how do you keep a new piece or opera you've done many times fresh and new?
Well, over the last years that I've been in Italy, in particular, with my orchestra in Rome, we tape all the concerts. And so I'm able to listen back, sometimes in horror, to my performances. And I really can learn from them. And we have also, I mean, of course, we have YouTube today. We can hear other people, even from the distant past, all our peers. We go on Spotify or Idagio and listen to all these, different performances of things, if we want. But at the end of the day, I've found that no matter how many times I've performed a piece, I find myself, after having gone through all the learning process, all the experience of having done something for the first time, that two things are true. One, I never do it better than the first time, or the concentration of and the joy of wanting to do something, brings out something in me that is so strong, or I struggle over years to get there. But I must say, in both cases, I do always come back and start from zero, because believe it or not, you do change. You change physically, you change mentally. Your gestures even change a little bit, depending on what you're focusing in on these days with your mind, your ears, your soul.
Yeah.
If it's an opera, you have different collaborators. So anyway, we have, and it could be a different orchestra sometimes. So some of the ingredients change. So you're going to have freshness there too. But I think sound is something that it's an amazing thing, because, for instance, in this pandemic period, the orchestras have had to play distanced. In other words, the string players play on separate stands, no sharing of stands. And all of a sudden, the sound has more room to maneuver. So what's happened is the sound becomes, and the resonance of the halls that we play in, because even now, with total lockdown, there are no audiences. Sound has room. It's resonating more. It changes the performance. It changes the way you conduct. It changes the way you listen. Sure, it's difficult because of the distance between you and the first and the first row of horns or the brass, but there's a fascination in having space around the sound. That's going to change. Acoustic in any pandemic or not pandemic situation will change a given performance, depending on the resonance of the room or the lack thereof.
Yeah.
And where you are in your progress, where you are in your journey as an interpreter, as a realizer of music, that has such a big part. Look, I'm not saying that all the time you get better and better. Sometimes you have to take 2 steps back to then make a huge leap forward. It does happen as it really does. Sometimes you lose your way. You get focused in on something, and you have to go through it, because on the other end, hopefully, you will
Progress. Yeah.
you will be more convinced of something that was really what you were aiming for all along. But it can be a torturous journey to keep music fresh.
Fresh. And there is this very important factor which we go through without even thinking about it, that there is a resistance of the material. This is something we have to go through, which is sometimes very painful, in order to get to the next level. Because if it's something so easy for you, sometimes it has no depth. If it's just very facile and everything, because different musicians, they have different relationship with their instruments. Some have a very easy relationship. The instrument always responds, and the others really have to work hard. And every instrument, imagine the pressure for the trumpet, or the chances of a horn sound going wrong is a completely different than the percussion. Yet one percussion could ruin a performance. The timpani sometimes, if timpani is not right. So there's a lot of things that we have to go and take into account. But I think, of course, in the solo repertoire, it's kind of easier and yet harder. But it's easy because what one does, I look at my old score, something that I've done many times, and I start changing things. I changed the bowings, the fingering, sometimes dynamic, not just for the sake, because I'm at a different age, and sometimes I feel, oh, this work I really couldn't conduct or couldn't play 20 years ago. Only now I've accumulated enough sort of maturity, also skills, and maybe sometimes the weight. There's certain pieces that you need to have so much endurance, like certain Shostakovich symphonies, also his violin sonata, certain pieces, you just need to be of a certain weight. And I do believe that, when Oistrakh said about the first concerto, he was, of course, the dedicatee, and he did the premiere. He said it's like a great Shakespearean role. I wouldn't recommend it to a teenager. I wouldn't even, they shouldn't attempt that. Or Beethoven concerto, you need to have a certain accumulated mileage of emotions and skills in order to come. And sometimes it's good to try it when you're young and then leave it. And then you come back, you'll see, my goodness, well, how could I not see it? Of course you couldn't, because of this. And very often it happens, for instance, with the Mendelssohn concerto, every 12-year-old who can move the fingers quickly, what they don't remember, that it was a late work of a super genius composer. It was written in 1845, and he died in 48. So 3 years before. It's a late work of an extremely accomplished 14-year-old, but he wrote it much later. It's a very mature and dramatic work. So, but it's okay. You play it. I played it also at the age of 16 first time, but maybe later I understood a little bit more of it. So I think it's an interesting process. But just speaking of, somebody asked a very nice, directly to you. You're known for being a great collaborator. Were you born with this quality, or is it something you learned?
Well, having played for my father's voice students and having accompanied so much from the very beginning, it was just the way of life. I've been collaborating with musicians, with me at the piano and me conducting now, with the great soloists for a long time. And I think I have the ability, I think, to understand the other person's point of view. And I can mold myself into their vision of the piece and yet still bring something to the table. still bring something that is, it sounds egotistical, but something that's mine. I mean, what we're trying to do is try to bring the composer's work to life, but you are who you are, and you bring what you are to the proceedings. But I'm able to be quite flexible rather quickly when I understand which way the soloist is going. And traditionally, it's a fact that often the soloist will come the day before the concert. You'll have one rehearsal, and then they'll play the general rehearsal, and then the concert. So it's a process that has to be relatively quick. So you have to have a successful collaboration. You need to understand each other very, very quickly. For me to just say, no, it has to be this way, and turn the soloist who's been practicing for hours, make them just completely change their view, I don't think is the right approach. You can do that if you have time, and if you really, really strongly believe something, and the soloist trusts you, then you can change quite a lot. But to do it in a very, very short time, I find difficult. You can do it as you're collaborating. You can propose. You can suggest.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, if the soloist is sensitive, they'll pick it up immediately, and vice versa. Hopefully, that's this teamwork.
It is like chamber music. It is like it's a real collaboration, and some of the best collaborations that I've had were with the conductors who always wanted to meet before, and to have again a plan, a mutual plan, so they know what I bring to the table, what's so-called my interpretation, because I've lived with that concerto hopefully for decades and played, and I have a strong idea. And I remember chasing some of the younger, incredibly gifted conductors who thought it was unnecessary. Oh, we've played so many things together, so now it's a Brahms concerto. So, we'll meet at the first rehearsal. No. I have specific, so I wanted to be a team before that first rehearsal, And somebody like Abado, of course, he had a piano rehearsal schedule. That's Marius Janssen's always wanted to do. Before we did GTO concerto, we probably had a 3-hour session, even without the violin, about every bar, every orchestral things and everything. And, sort of like sometimes you and I go through the score bar by bar. So many interests. I was conducting in Seattle in the brand new, fantastic new hall. This is years ago, more than 20 years ago or something. They just built this beautiful Benaroya hall, just installed the organ. I'm playing Tartini, Devil's Trill Sonata, which uses the organ. I'm turning towards it. All of a sudden, 6.8 earthquake hit. The whole thing just started for a minute. We went onto the arch of the door, and plaster from there. And of course, I couldn't wait. I couldn't help. I said, "Was it something I said?" Because it was literally, I was addressing the organ player, and I was like, "Boom!" So I have to watch what I say. Maybe there's some magic words, like like that completely automated Siri. I never used Siri, but it responds to certain words, and all of a sudden starts talking to me in male voice. I said, "I don't know you." Anyway, so I obviously said something. Now, of course, I don't remember what we were talking about. Anyway, let's go to the next question. There's some nice ones. So what do you think, based on your not sort of orthodox education as a musician, what do you think? What is the best education for a musician in your experience? The old apprenticeship way or the newer college route? Are there pros and cons to both? It's an important, I think, question.
I think it's very difficult for a musician today to avoid the conservatory.
Yeah.
Also because so many teaching positions require some kind of diploma. Now, I don't have that diploma. Okay, I don't. I have an honorary doctorate.
Oh, you're a doctor, yeah.
But so I think to say today, well, come out of high school or come out of secondary school in England and then go into work, it's probably a little bit unrealistic. That said, I think the conservatory is not life. The conservatory is an incubation period that can become your life if you're not careful. And how do you avoid that? Well, I think practical experiences that are out of the curriculum are hugely important. Whenever you can get out, even to play for anybody, if you're a piano player, to accompany a singer, to accompany an instrumentalist, go and play if you have that capacity to play in a cocktail lounge, play hymns in the church if you can. Do something that is part of the real world, because you'll be prepared in a different way. You'll know you'll become a professional. And this is very, very important. The necessity of being a professional, somebody who understands how the business works. What is the etiquette? What is the level of preparation? How well do you have to read? Your rhythm, your intonation, all those things get put into a situation, into a practical situation where you might be getting paid not necessarily, but you might be getting paid. Therefore, you have to deliver the pact of, you get paid for doing service.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. It's that try to create experiences that are varied and as that bring you into contact with the most people. I think that's hugely, hugely important. And don't wait to be told to learn a piece. Be aware of the repertoire. Be aware of music that surrounds the music that you're learning at the moment. For me, the biggest negative of not having gone to school was obviously not being around people my age.
Social factor.
The social factor, and the fact that I didn't hear enough music, didn't hear enough symphonic music, didn't hear enough chamber music, didn't play enough chamber music. This was for me the negative side. I've been playing catch up ever since.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I could have had those experiences much earlier. So I think there's a positive, and conservatory can be a trap, a safe haven, a bubble that is not what it's all about.
And once you come out of it, you seem not to be fit for the rest of your life, for the difficulties and the questions that never been answered by your teachers at school, because they also live in a kind of a bubble very often. But of course, I remember, the Moscow experience is something else. And I was just very lucky to be it's still at the height of the golden period of Russian, music. Shostakovich was alive. The people that I came in contact, you could only dream of. But also at Juilliard, I found tremendous amount of possibilities. I watched every other day. I went to Juilliard Theater for free and saw Shakespeare plays. There were great giants of theater: John Houseman, Alan Schneider. They were all teaching there. Robin Williams just graduated, and great actors and everything. Ballet was right there. I remember seeing Nureyev coming for a class in the morning. The same building, Juilliard. And then, of course, chamber music. Not only that I had a chance to study chamber music, but how we had this into the night till 3 in the morning on pizza and beer, chamber music parties with the future members of the Emerson String Quartet, some great soloists, some chamber musicians, some who became conductors and so forth, composers. Of course, being in New York City does help. But even that does not substitute for what you had later on, having already worked as an absolutely top pianist in opera house, the most. That's how we met in in Frankfurt in the mid 80s. You were absolutely the number one. Everybody wanted to work with Tony, and of course you were assisting Michael Gillen as well as a number of very, very talented who became later very successful conductors. But also you had a great chance to be next to a musical giant, Barenboim. And that apprenticeship, I think, is very often missing. Unless you are a conductor who happened to be an assistant or a great conductor, then maybe you have a chance. But it has to be more than that. And I always wished that we had a situation somehow where the end of the 19th century in Russia, where Zverev, there was a great piano pedagogue, and he had his students who lived practically in his house. And that was Rachmaninoff and Scriabin and Zilotti, and one better than a phenomenal group. And they were all apprentices of his. He taught them more than just piano playing. And there's a great deal. So it's a very typical Renaissance model of what in Florence, in the same house was Leonardo da Vinci and Botticelli and Perugino, and they were all part of this one great a great shop of their teachers. So that model for me has a certain allure, because maybe this is what I had early on, because I was surrounded by musical giants. And then I saw how difficult it was to get back to them. Then the conductors became so, sort of impossible to approach, which leads us to yet another question before I totally tire you out. And, we'll try to keep that. What's, in your opinion, the best way for the young performers and notice today? Is it still competitions, auditions, or now perhaps more online material like website, YouTube, and so forth? What would be your suggestion for the young ones to be heard, to be noticed, and to have a chance to be advanced somewhere?
Well, I think you have to be convinced of what it is you want to do, what it is you actually want to aspire to. If you want to be a conductor, well, then sooner rather than later, you need to be putting your head into the scores, into looking at these big creations, these complicated, complex beasts. And I recommend certainly going to watch and listen to other conductors rehearse. You must have a score with you to be able to understand what it is that's going on. You not just sit there and taking it in. I think you have to see you have to have the music and see how the conductor works on the music, how he puts it together, how he massages it into a coherent whole, and how the players react to his gesture, to his comments. If you are an instrumentalist, I think competitions are probably inevitable if you want to be a soloist. It's not for everybody. That kind of tension and nervous energy and bravado and just real confidence. Not everybody has it, but it's a way. If you want to go into the orchestra, I think there are so many summer programs. There's so many apprenticeships for orchestral musicians, and to be informed, to use the web here, to find out what's going on. What can you audition for? What can you, who's coming to that to that summer program? What teachers are going to be there? What instrumentalists? All that thing. Of course, you have to be good enough. Eventually, you have to get this opportunity. But if you don't know about the opportunities that are out there, then none of it's going to help you. So I think initiative and curiosity are two qualities that have to be present in the musician, when the young person. Otherwise, you're going to get nowhere. For me, the catapult. My family had moved to America in the early 70s, and after having spent my first 13 years here in England. But I eventually realized that if I wanted to get anywhere as a rehearsal pianist, as an assistant, and that was very much in my thinking. I had no thoughts of conducting. I needed, I could speak Italian. I was, very familiar with the Italian repertoire, but almost not. But I had no familiarity with the German repertoire. So I said, I've got to learn German, and I've got to, So I ended up, after a while, back in Europe, because I wanted to be exposed to something that I felt I couldn't get in America to the same degree, level of intensity. And so I all of a sudden I was back in Europe, and that decision alone helped me, bring together so many different strands, and gave me the greater education I needed to then eventually wake up one day and say, wait a minute, I can conduct too, if I, having watched other people do it. And if I use my gifts such as they are in a certain way, I can do that too.
Yeah. And indeed it happened that way. But of course, to have, there's always, the same thing. There's so many, heavy expectations. Or if I had an agent, if I got an agent. No, all agent or anybody can do is to open one door just a little bit. Then once you come in, it's all about how you use that opportunity. And there are some people who use it incredibly well, and others just wait for another opportunity, because it just, it's not going to be given to you. But what I also wish that there were more maybe programs, sort of the master and student, I hear about certain things, and it's being supported, to be able to observe, a master a day in the life of, just to observe, just to see what it takes, what energy, what concentration, what preparation, what nerves, what organization, sense of purpose, all kinds of sacrifices, but also, just to be able to, I was able to see it, fortunately, from the very beginning, because I was in the house of performers, but most people just don't know. And I think also these days, of course, online becomes a very important. If I hire somebody, if I need somebody, I hear immediately YouTube. It's not always the best way, but these days, when we cannot actually physically see each other, it's probably also important to have a good website. It's clear that people could go and get really good, reasonably good quality, samples of what you sound like, because it's, in any case, teaching online, it's already a compromise on the quality of sound, but there's no compromise on the account of what can give and the amount of information. I've been asked not only the violin lessons, I've been asked also conducting lessons. I've been asked now the how to rehearse. A wonderful violinist now has to do something without a conductor. I have big experience. So the whole consultation, what to do before, what to do, what to rehearse, what not to rehearse. There's a lot of things you can do from a distance, you know, from a long distance. So I think the more proactive one and the more you think outside of the box, I think will be the thing. Of course, now the last question I'm going to ask you, and then I won't torture you anymore. But it's an important, interesting question. It's translation from Russia, so pardon me if it's not ideal, but it appears that so-called the risk group, now both of us belong to so-called the risk group to a certain degree, you know, risk group age that you both belong, so we both belong. We seem to cope with the pandemic better than the young ones. Perhaps it's the experience of continuous difficulties in the past, in my case, immigration, also moving, being part of the minority, not fitting in, while the young ones living in comfort find the new situation devastating. What could help them not to lose faith and hope?
Well, I think I'm stating the obvious here that financially, people like you and myself are probably better equipped to deal with this catastrophe. How does a young musician get through this? Some of them won't. I think you have to have a certain resilience of personality and patience and the ability to use this time productively. That's not easy. And I think young musicians, you know, at the beginning of a career, especially soloists, you know, there's a certain accumulation of work that creates you know, a rhythm that becomes then a career.
Yeah.
When that is interrupted, boy, it's probably quite difficult to get going again, because you imagine institutions have made all these cancellations, but musical institutions with like the ones we work with and for plan also quite far in advance, so they've already booked people for. So what are these young people going to do? They've, you know, lost a lot of work, and you know, to get them rebooked with the same organizations, very difficult. But again, and you just mentioned it, thinking outside the box, continuing to work and using the time to hone your skills, to prepare to think about music as, and especially if you're a soloist, to think of it not only as just you, but what's around it, to learn a concerto, but learn it really properly, like, you know, the orchestra part inside out as well, to really do that, to use this opportunity to do that kind of work. You know, if you're a piano player, to enrich your knowledge of harmony, repertoire, for singers to keep singing. Just, this is perhaps the most difficult, because singing has been punished. The singers have been punished most of all, and but to keep the voice and the diaphragm, the body energized, to keep the athletic aspect of being a singer, keep that going. Don't fall into a state of stasis physically, because you might not come out of that. And so those are harsh words, but I think it's very, very important to just be ready, be prepared for the eventual opening of the doors.
Yeah, and as I remember, beginning of my career, you know, when I was already in the West, and you just obviously one doesn't have the kind of repertoire that you acquire with age, but the quicker you can turn on. I mean, I remember jumping in for Menuhin, with incredible adventure, getting from Muncie, Indiana, in the middle of winter, and where the car broke down on the way to Chicago airport, and the way, it's all kinds of things. But I had to do it with no time because I was giving a master class there. And the next morning was one and only rehearsal, and the concert was the next night, the same night. And I had no sleep, nothing. The whole time I traveled, I nearly froze to death in the car while somebody who was driving with me took 3 hours to start the car, and it never started. So I ended up taking a taxi for $200.84 to get to Chicago airport. And when they saw me, and they said, well, your flight is canceled. I must have had a look in my eye, having not slept the whole night for an 8 hours trip, that she said, oh, don't worry, we'll reroute you through Minneapolis, because she knew I was going to kill her right on the spot. So anyway, I arrived there at 10:15. Rehearsal started at 10. They took me directly to the to the orchestra. I opened the violin, and there is a Beethoven concerto. The same night was the concert. The next two repeats, and that's how my Canadian career started. And I was all over Canada after that because it went well. So you have to be physically, mentally, and also instrumentally and musically totally prepared for something like that. I know, for instance, that a lot of our concerts, my concerts where I played, conducted, they went to now local people in Japan. Japanese continue to perform. So a lot of young people had the opportunity to play instead of me, because all the foreigners just stayed home, didn't. So a lot of things happened, and all of a sudden you could, could you be next day? So you have to be prepared for that. And for singers especially, somebody gets sick. I remember, Susan Roberts, my wonderful wife, she jumped in. Oh, I couldn't believe it. In the afternoon, they called it to that evening. Fortunately, we were not very far to go into Magic Flute as Papagena without any rehearsals. They just walked her through the things. And that evening, and John Pritchard was there. There was another Papagena. That's it. You have to, in the theater world, you have to do it. So that's what makes you a success, because you can be just called upon, a constellation. Of course, to prepare hypothetically for this is difficult, but you can see what's happening, and you can see who is, now there's so many changes, and you've done even some performances which you were not supposed to do, right? In the meantime.
Yeah, I've jumped in for people myself. Yeah.
Exactly. So, because you happen to be available. I mean, I would have never done this online project with my musical family, with NES, John Brooks, if they were not all at home, and most of them free. So we were able to do all these. We're about to, in 2 days, it'll be our 10th, distant video, which is incredibly complex, as you know, to do. But in normal situation, this one's got it. And then the time difference between Seattle and Moscow and London in between. So, there are advantages of it. There are things that we learn, there are new skills, there are new possibilities. It's always, we shouldn't forget that in the 14th century, when that horrible Black Death plague was there, a lot more people died than even now, much more. And was devastating, but the Renaissance came after that. That is something we hope might be the case. And being the eternal optimist, maybe that
Renaissance, the word itself, a rebirth.
Rebirth. Great. On that wonderful note, thank you so much, Tony. That's been most wonderful and generous. And of course, we hope next time we meet, it'll be vaccine will be working, and we'll be all in much better shape. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Dima. Thank you.